Alara Vance existed in a state of quiet, managed depletion. It was a skill she had perfected over 7 years, the careful rationing of her spirit, her energy, her hope. She portioned it out like a wartime scarcity, just enough to get through the day, the week, the project, but never enough to feel full, never enough to dream. Her brilliance was a currency she was forced to spend on someone else's legacy, and the exchange rate was ruinous. Today, the reserves were gone. The well was dry. She stood in the center of Julian Croft's new flagship boutique on Rue Saint-Honoré, a ghost haunting her own creation. The space was hers. The cool, veined marble underfoot, chosen to mimic the patterns of a winter river. The soaring ceilings and brass fixtures, arranged to draw the eye upward to create a sense of secular worship. Every line, so every texture, every fall of light was a sentence she had written in the language of architecture and design. But her name was nowhere. The signature on the masterpiece belonged to Julian. As always. He was holding court near the entrance, his voice a practiced theatrical boom that filled the nave of his new temple. He was a man constructed of expensive fabrics and unearned confidence. His posture was a study in practiced relaxation, a casual lean against a display case that had cost more than Alara's first apartment. He gestured with a flute of champagne, his words painting a picture of his own solitary genius. He did not mention her. He never did. She was the foundation, unseen and underground, upon which he built his glittering spires. Today was the launch of the Aurelian Couture collection. It was also... Alara had decided that morning, the day of her resignation. The thought did not bring relief, only a deeper shade of exhaustion. Leaving meant walking away from the only professional life she had ever known, but staying meant the slow, complete erosion of her soul. She had the letter in her purse, a single sheet of paper that felt as heavy as a stone tablet. She would wait until the reporters left, until the sycophants dispersed. She would do it quietly. It was her way. Her gaze drifted to the centerpiece of the collection, the gown that had cost her more than any other. It was a column of white silk charmeuse, so pure it seemed to generate its own light. It was not merely a dress. It was a piece of architectural engineering. Thousands of microscopic hand-stitched pearls and crystals formed a constellation across the bodice, cascading down one side in a sweep of starlight. It was her best work, a love letter to her craft, written in the dead of night while Julian was sleeping or celebrating some other stolen victory. "It's magnificent, isn't it?" The whisper came from a young model, a girl with wide, hopeful eyes who was waiting for her fitting. Alara managed a small, tired smile. "He has a clear vision." She used the phrase like a shield. It was the corporate-approved line, the one that kept the peace. The model sighed, her eyes fixed on the white gown. "I wish I could wear that one," but he said, "Well?" She trailed off, blushing. Alara knew what he had said. Julian had opinions. They were loud, they were frequent, and they were cruel. He called them aesthetic standards. She called them weapons. A sharp, imperious clap echoed through the boutique. "Ow, Julian. Ilara, stop lurking in the shadows and make yourself useful. The DuPonts are here. Go tell them the story of the embroidery. You know, the little fairy tale you invented." Her jaw tightened. The fairy tale was a meticulously researched history of a nearly lost 18th century embroidery technique she had resurrected and modernized for the collection. She had spent 3 months on it. He had spent 3 minutes listening before claiming it as his own inspiration. She moved toward the wealthy couple, her face a mask of polite professionalism. She felt the familiar dissociation settle over her, a thin layer of ice forming between herself and the world. She was a recording, playing back the approved narrative. An hour passed in a blur of fake smiles and recycled anecdotes. The boutique was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of brittle laughter. Alara felt a familiar ache begin behind her eyes. She needed to leave. She needed air. She was making her way toward the back, toward the quiet sanctuary of the stockroom, when Julian's voice sliced through the noise again. Ah, Madame Renaud, a pleasure. You have your eye on the starlight gown, I see. The crown jewel of the collection. He was speaking to the wife of a French industrialist, a woman known for her extravagant purchases. Madame Renaud, a woman who looked like a walking bank vault, nodded. It is a statement. She circled it slowly. I wonder if it would be right for my daughter. For a debutante ball? Perfection, Julian purred. Alara paused, her hand on the stockroom door. She could not help but watch. It was a compulsion, like pressing on a bruise. Then another woman stepped forward. She was not one of the clients. She was a journalist, a young, ambitious writer from a major fashion magazine, her phone held up to discreetly record a video for her publication's social media. Her skin was the color of rich, dark earth, and she wore her hair in a crown of intricate braids. She looked at the white gown with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. That is the most beautiful dress I have ever seen, she said, her voice soft but clear. Julian's smile tightened at the edges. He did not like being interrupted, especially by the press, unless he was controlling the interaction. It is, isn't it? He said, his tone condescending. The journalist reached out a hand, stopping just short of touching the fabric. A work of art. And then it happened. The moment the world tilted on its axis. Julian, full of champagne and self-importance, looked from the journalist's dark hand to the pristine white silk. He let out a short, ugly laugh. My dear, please, he said, his voice carrying across the now quieting room. Let's be realistic. That dress is an aspiration. It's for a certain kind of woman. A certain purity of presentation. He looked pointedly at her skin, then back at the gown. Dark girls don't belong in white gowns. It's simply a matter of aesthetics. It would be a visual tragedy. Silence. Not the quiet of reverence he had curated with his architecture. This was a different kind of silence, a sharp, jagged, sucking void. Every conversation stopped. Every champagne flute froze halfway to a pair of lips. The journalist's hand, which had been hovering near the dress, dropped to her side as if burned. Her face, once full of wonder, became a mask of stunned disbelief, then profound humiliation. Color flooded her cheeks, a painful, dark blush of shame. She took a step back, then another. She looked like she wanted the marble floor to swallow her whole. Alara did not scream. She did not gasp. She simply stopped breathing. The ice around her shattered. The carefully managed depletion, the years of quiet endurance, collapsed into a single blinding point of white-hot rage. He had not just insulted the journalist. He had taken Alara's work, the purest thing she had ever created, the gown that represented months of sleepless nights and silent devotion, and he had twisted it into a weapon of casual public bigotry. He had defiled it. He had defiled her. Julian seemed to realize he had misstepped. Not because he felt remorse, but because the silence was now accusatory. The clients were staring. Madame Renaud looked horrified. He was a performer who had lost his audience. He tried to recover with a dismissive wave of his hand. Oh, don't be so sensitive, everyone. It's fashion. It's about creating a fantasy, an ideal. Not everyone can be a part of every fantasy. That's what makes it exclusive. He was working from an old version of the world, a file that had not been updated. He thought his power was absolute. Alara started moving. She did not know what she was going to do. Slap him, scream, take the resignation letter and tear it up in his face. But she was moving toward him, her vision narrowing until he was the only thing she could see. Her progress was arrested by a hand on her arm. It was gentle but firm. It was one of the boutique's seamstresses, an older woman named Inez, who had often sat with Alara in the workroom late at night, sharing a thermos of tea in weary solidarity. Inez's eyes were full of warning. Don't, they said. He will destroy you. The journalist was already fleeing, pushing her way through the paralyzed crowd, her face a blur of tears. Julian watched her go, a smirk of cruel satisfaction on his lips. He had reasserted his dominance. He thought he had won. He had not. Because across the room, near the entrance he had been preening in just minutes before, a man who had been examining a collection of silk ties suddenly looked up. He had been there for at least half an hour, a quiet island of stillness in the churning sea of the launch party. He was not dressed like the other men. They wore fashion. He wore armor. A suit of charcoal wool so exquisitely tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. He was tall, with the severe, handsome face of a Roman bust. His presence had been so understated as to be almost invisible. Until now. Now, it was the only thing in the room that mattered. He did not rush. He was not performing. He simply placed the silk tie he had been holding back on its rack with unnerving precision. He turned his head, and his gaze, dark, calm, and impossibly heavy, swept across the room and landed on Julian Croft. The shift was instantaneous. It was tectonic. The brittle, chattering energy of the boutique evaporated, replaced by a silence that was dense and absolute. The kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. It was the silence of a courtroom when the judge enters. It was the silence of a forest when a predator is near. Every person in that room, from the billionaire industrialist to the youngest model, felt it. A primal, inexplicable drop in barometric pressure. Julian felt it too. His smirk faltered. The performative relaxation in his shoulders vanished, replaced by a sudden, rigid tension. He looked at the man by the door like a mouse spotting the shadow of a hawk. A flicker of confusion, then irritation, then a dawning, sickening realization. He knew who that was. He might not have known him personally, but he knew the face from the deep, hidden pages of the financial press, the kind that reported on power that didn't need to announce itself. The man was Dante Moretti. The name itself was a form of currency, a brand of fear and respect traded in whispers in boardrooms and back alleys. When he was the head of the Moretti Group, a global conglomerate with holdings so vast and varied they were almost impossible to track. Shipping, construction, finance, technology, and other things. Things people didn't talk about. He was a man who moved in a world of structural power, the deep, quiet, load-bearing columns that held up the visible world. Julian, with his loud pronouncements and fragile ego, was merely decorative wallpaper. Dante Moretti took a single step forward, then another. His movements were unhurried, deliberate, each footfall on the marble floor landing with the finality of a gavel. He was not walking toward Julian. He was walking toward the white gown. He stopped in front of it, his formidable frame eclipsing it for a moment. He looked at the intricate beadwork, the sweep of the silk. His expression was unreadable. Ilara watched, frozen, the hand of the seamstress still a warm weight on her arm. He reached out, not to touch the dress, but to pluck the small, discreet price tag from where it was tucked into a seam. He held it between his thumb and forefinger, examining the number written in elegant calligraphy. He held it up for a moment, a silent question. A terrified-looking store manager, a young man in a suit that was suddenly 2 sizes too big for him, scurried forward. "Mr. Moretti, sir, is there something I can help you with?" Dante's gaze did not leave the dress. His voice, when it came, was shockingly quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the silent room. It was a low, resonant baritone, steady as iron wrapped in silk. "This price," he said, still looking at the tag. "Is it for the gown?" Yes, sir." "That is the price for the starlight gown," the manager stammered. Dante finally turned his head, his eyes moving past the manager, past the frozen statues of the clientele, and settling once more on Julian Croft. He did not look angry. He did not look emotional at all. He looked like an auditor who had found a discrepancy in the books, a fatal one. "A beautiful piece," Dante said, his voice still unnervingly calm. "A work of art," as the journalist noted. Julian paled. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a waxy, unhealthy color. He tried to speak, but only a dry, clicking sound came out. Dante took a small, almost imperceptible step toward him. You believe it is only for a certain kind of woman. It was not a question, it was a statement of fact, a charge being read aloud. It was a misunderstanding, Julian stammered, his voice thin and reedy. The theatrical boom was gone. All that was left was the small, frightened man beneath. A poor choice of words, in the heat of the moment. Dante gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. It was a gesture of finality. No, he said, the word a soft, sharp cut. It was a moment of clarity. You clarified your position. Now I will clarify mine. He turned back to the terrified manager. I'm buying the dress. The manager blinked. Of course, sir. Right away. I'll have it wrapped for you. No, Dante said again. He let the price tag fall from his fingers. It fluttered to the marble floor. I'm buying the collection. The silence in the room deepened, if that were possible. It pressed in on them, heavy and suffocating. Sir, the manager whispered. All of it, Dante clarified, his voice devoid of any inflection. Every piece from the Aurelian line, the gowns, the suits, the accessories, everything in this store and everything in your stockroom, and the name. Aurelian. I'm buying the trademark. Have your legal department draw up the sale documents. My assistant will be in touch within the hour to arrange the wire transfer. He gestured with his chin toward a sleek, severe-looking woman standing near the door, who had appeared as if from thin air. She was already on her phone, her expression one of bored efficiency. She was the efficient subordinate, the executor of quiet commands. Julian stared, his mouth hanging open. He looked from Dante to the manager to the dress, his mind visibly failing to process the scale of what was happening. You can't do that, he finally managed to say. It's my collection. It's my launch. Dante turned his full attention back to Julian. For the first time, a flicker of something that might have been contempt touched his eyes. You seem to be operating under the misapprehension that you have a choice, he said, his voice dropping even lower. Your brand, Croft Couture, is leveraged to the hilt. The primary debt holder is a private equity firm, which, as of 20 minutes ago, is a fully owned subsidiary of the Moretti Group. Your lease on this building? I own the building. The suppliers for your fabrics? I bought their largest distributor last month. You are standing in my house, selling clothes made from my materials, financed by my money. He took another slow step forward. He was so close now that Julian had to crane his neck to look up at him. You are not a designer, Dante said, his voice a blade of ice. You are a tenant, and your lease has been terminated. Julian made a choking sound. His knees seemed to buckle. The sheer, comprehensive totality of his ruin was crashing down on him, and he could not withstand the weight. Dante's gaze then moved, for the first time, to Alara. She was still standing by the stockroom door, Inez's hand having fallen away from her arm. He looked at her, and his expression, for the barest fraction of a second, softened. It was not pity. It was recognition. It was the look of a man who knew exactly who and what he was looking at. He saw the architect, not the assistant. He nodded slightly toward the white gown. The collection will be delivered to my residence this evening, he said, his voice once again a calm, declarative statement. Then his eyes met hers directly. You should come with it. The artist should be with her work. With that, he turned, his charcoal suit moving without a single wrinkle. He did not look back. His assistant fell into step behind him. The spell broke. The room exploded into a cacophony of frantic whispers. Julian Croft, the great designer, slid down the wall, his face in his hands, making small, wounded animal sounds. He was a king who had just discovered his kingdom was made of cardboard and his crown was paper. Alara stood perfectly still. The white-hot rage had cooled, replaced by a vast, terrifying, and exhilarating emptiness. A blank page, a cleared board. The man had not just defended a stranger. He had not just avenged a public humiliation. He had, in the space of 5 minutes, systematically unwritten her entire life of quiet suffering. He had torn down the prison she was about to flee and handed her not a key, but a sledgehammer. The artist should be with her work. The words echoed in the sudden void of her future. It was not a request. It was not an order. It was a statement of what was right, an acknowledgement of a truth she herself had almost forgotten. She looked at the white gown, her gown, no longer a symbol of her stolen genius, but a beacon. Then she looked at the door through which Dante Moretti had disappeared. She took a breath, and for the first time in 7 years, it felt like her own. The drive was silent. Ilara sat in the back of a black sedan that moved through the Parisian night with the liquid grace of poured ink. The car did not smell new. It smelled of old leather and quiet money. It was the kind of vehicle that rendered the city outside a silent film. She watched the lights of the Champs-Élysées blur into streaks of gold and white, feeling utterly detached from her own body. Shock was a strange, cold blanket. Dante Moretti sat beside her. He was not looking at her. He was looking out his own window, his profile as stark and unmoving as a carving on a monument. He had not spoken a word since his assistant, a woman named Sophia with eyes that missed nothing, had opened the car door for Ilara. Sophia had simply murmured, "Miss Vance," and gestured inside. It was assumed Ilara would comply. She had. The alternative, remaining in the wreckage of Julian's boutique, a place that was now a crime scene of social and financial devastation, was unthinkable. She studied him in the intermittent glow of the streetlights. He did not fidget. He did not check a phone. He simply existed, occupying his space with an economy of motion that was both calming and deeply intimidating. He was a man who had mastered the art of stillness. Ilara, whose mind was a constant maelstrom of calculations, anxieties, and unvoiced arguments, found his quiet unnerving. It was a vacuum, and she felt the chaos of her own thoughts being pulled into it. She thought about the past 7 years. She thought about the endless nights, fueled by caffeine and desperation, sketching designs that Julian would later present as his own fleeting inspirations. She thought about the way he would praise her in private, calling her his secret weapon, his muse, and then erase her in public, introducing her as his protégé, or worse, his assistant. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate, a version he had created to soothe his own colossal insecurity. He needed her to be small so that he could feel big. And this man, this stranger, had seen through it all in an instant. He had looked at the chaos of the boutique and correctly identified the load-bearing wall. The artist should be with her work. The words replayed not as a compliment, but as a simple statement of fact. He had recognized her. In a room full of people who had looked at her for years and seen only a shadow, he had seen the person casting it. The disorientation of it was dizzying. It was like being spoken to in your native tongue after years of living in a foreign country where you were barely fluent. "I don't know who you are," she said, her voice small but clear in the silent car. It was the first thing she had said since leaving the boutique. Dante turned his head slowly. His eyes, in the dim light, were darker than the night outside. "You do," he said. His voice was still that low, steady baritone. "You just don't know my name." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "The building your firm leased for its main atelier on Rue de Turenne," he said. "The owners were a holding company, Artemis Properties. That's one of mine. 2 years ago there was a structural issue with the roof after a storm. The engineering report recommended a standard, ugly patch and repair job. A week later, a new proposal was submitted. It was a complete redesign of the roof's truss system, turning a simple repair into a work of art. It was more efficient, more structurally sound, and flooded the top-floor studio with natural light. It was brilliant. It was signed by Julian Croft. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. She remembered. The storm. The leaks. Julian had been furious about the potential cost and downtime. She had stayed up for 3 nights, redrawing the plans, finding a solution that was not just a fix, but an improvement. She had been proud of it. Julian had glanced at her drawings, grunted, and signed his name at the bottom before submitting them. I read the proposal, Dante continued, his gaze steady. I knew Julian Croft's design portfolio. He is a competent draper of fabric. But he has the structural imagination of a garden slug. The proposal was not his work. It had a different signature, a different mind behind it. I asked my people to find the architect. They found you. The cold blanket of shock began to recede, replaced by a prickling, spreading warmth. He had been watching, not her precisely, her work, for 2 years. This was not a random act of chivalry. This was the calculated move of a collector who had finally decided to acquire a piece he had long admired. You've been investigating me? The thought was both terrifying and strangely validating. I don't investigate, he stated simply, a negative declaration that held more weight than any boast. I gather information. I learned you were the uncredited mind behind every successful collection and every design choice at that company for the last 7 years. I learned how you were treated. I learned that you were preparing to leave. Julian's behavior tonight was not a surprise. It was merely the final data point I required before taking action. Corporate metaphors for a corporate-style execution. He had not acted out of passion or anger. He had acted on a complete and verified set of facts. He had run the numbers and decided Julian Croft was a liability to be liquidated. And she? What was she? An asset to be acquired? The thought should have been chilling. It should have felt like trading one cage for another, albeit a much larger, more gilded one. But it didn't, because his next words changed the equation. Genius should not be indentured, he said. It's inefficient. Inefficient. The word was so cold, so transactional, yet in it she heard a strange kind of respect. He wasn't talking about her as a woman or a victim or a damsel in distress. He was talking about her as a resource, a force of nature that was being squandered. He saw her talent not as something to be owned, but as something to be unleashed. The car slowed, turning off the main thoroughfare onto a quiet, tree-lined street in the 16th arrondissement. It stopped before a set of immense, wrought-iron gates set into a high stone wall. The wall was so tall and seamless you couldn't see what lay beyond. A guard in a dark uniform stepped out of a small gatehouse, nodded at the car, and the gates swung inward without a sound. They swept up a gravel driveway that crunched softly under the tires. The car came to a halt before a house that was less a house and more a statement of intent. It was a modern mansion, a severe and beautiful structure of glass, steel, and dark stone. It was not opulent. It was precise. It looked like one of her own designs, if she'd had an infinite budget and a disregard for gravity. The car door was opened by another silent man in a dark suit. Dante stepped out, and Alara followed, her legs feeling unsteady. The night air was cool and smelled of damp earth and blooming night jasmine. The front door of the house opened, spilling a warm golden light onto the driveway. An old woman stood in the doorway. She was small and stout, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a simple black dress, and her face was a roadmap of wrinkles, but her eyes were as dark and sharp as Dante's. She looked at Alara, her gaze sweeping over her from head to toe. It was not a judgmental look. It was an appraisal. So, the old woman said, her voice a gravelly rasp. This is the architect. Dante placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. Nona, this is Ilara Vance. The old woman, his grandmother, took a step forward. She ignored her grandson completely and walked right up to Ilara, peering into her face. Ilara felt a tremor of fear. This was the matriarch, the wise elder, the one whose approval mattered more than any board of directors. Nona reached out and took Alara's hand. Her skin was dry and papery, but her grip was surprisingly strong. You have tired eyes, she declared. It was not an insult. It was a diagnosis. He keeps you up all night with his ridiculous plans, eh? She jerked her head toward Dante. Alara was so surprised she couldn't speak. Nona patted her hand. Don't worry, I will teach you how to manage him. He thinks he is the king, but even a king must eat his supper. Come inside, child. You look like you are about to collapse. Sophia has a room ready for you. There is soup." She turned and shuffled back into the house, still holding Ilara's hand, pulling her along as if she had already decided the matter. Ilara looked back at Dante. He was watching them, a faint, almost imperceptible hint of a smile on his lips. It was the first time she had seen it, and it changed his entire face, softening the severe lines into something approaching warmth. "My grandmother believes soup can solve most of the world's problems," he said quietly. "She is not always wrong." Ilara allowed herself to be led into the light. The house was vast, but not cold. Art hung on the walls, real art, Picasso's and Rothko's, not decorative prints. They hung next to framed children's drawings. A grand piano stood in one corner, a worn, well-used book of sheet music left open. This was not a showroom. It was a home. Later that night, wrapped in a silk robe she'd found laid out for her in a guest suite larger than her entire apartment, Ilara stood on a balcony overlooking a sprawling garden. The city of Paris twinkled in the distance, a silent, glittering carpet. A quiet knock came at her door. It was Sophia, holding a single glass of amber liquid. "Mr. Moretti thought you might like this," she said, her voice professional but not unkind. "It's a 20-year-old single malt. He says it's good for shock." Ilara took the glass. "Thank you." Sophia hesitated for a moment, her mask of efficiency slipping. "What happened tonight? I've worked for him for 10 years. I have seen him dismantle corporations, ruin political careers, and end men who thought they were untouchable. I have never seen him do it over a dress." She gave a small, sharp nod and was gone. Ilara took a sip of the scotch. It was smooth and smoky, and it burned a slow, clean path down to her stomach. She looked out at the lights. In a few hours, trucks would arrive bearing the entire Aurelian collection, her work, all of it, bought and paid for by a man who had recognized her in the dark. She was in the lion's den. There was no question about that. Dante Moretti was a dangerous man. His quiet was the quiet of immense, coiled power. But for the first time in a very long time, she was not afraid. Julian had made her feel small, fragile, and replaceable. Dante Moretti, the quiet sovereign, the Mafia boss, had made her feel something else entirely. Seen. And as she stood there, in his house, drinking his scotch, she realized with a jolt that was more profound than any shock she had felt that day that the cage door had been open all along. She had just been too tired to see it. He hadn't opened it for her. He had simply pointed it out. And now, for the first time, she was contemplating what it might feel like to fly. The first week in the Moretti residence was a study in disorientation. Ilara woke each morning in a bed of impossible softness, the silence of the house a thick, insulating blanket against the world. She would find coffee, hot and black, waiting for her on a silver tray outside her door. She would wander the vast museum-like corridors, so feeling like a ghost haunting a life that was not her own. The Aurelian collection had arrived, as promised. It was housed in a dedicated, climate-controlled room that resembled a high-end archive. The gowns, including the white starlight gown, hung in breathable garment bags, their beauty dormant, waiting. She was adrift. For 7 years, her life had been a frantic rhythm of deadlines, demands, and Julian's ever-shifting moods. Her days were structured by his needs. Now, with that structure violently amputated, she floated in a sea of unstructured time. The quiet was unnerving. It gave her too much space to think, to feel the deep, cellular exhaustion that had been her constant companion. She spent hours just staring out the window, watching the gardeners tend to the roses, the sheer normality of it feeling alien. Dante did not press her. He gave her space, a commodity she had never been afforded. He would leave for the day before she woke and often return late in the evening. Their interactions were brief, almost formal. They would sometimes pass in a hallway, exchanging quiet greetings. He would ask if she needed anything. She would say no. It was a polite, distant dance. Her only constant companion was his grandmother. Nonna, as everyone called her, seemed to have appointed herself Alara's guardian. She would find Alara in the library and press a plate of biscotti into her hands. "You are too thin," she would declare. "An architect needs strength. How can you build things if you are made of sticks?" She would sit with her in the garden, shelling peas into a large silver bowl, and tell her stories of her childhood in Sicily, of a world that felt both brutal and beautiful. She never asked about Julian. She never asked about what had happened. She simply treated Alara's presence as the most natural thing in the world. "He is a good boy, my Dante," Nonna said one afternoon, her fingers deftly snapping the ends off green beans. "But he is complicated. He sees the world in lines and numbers, cause and effect. He sees a beautiful machine with a broken part, and he must fix it. He does not always understand that the part has feelings." She looked up at Alara, her dark eyes sharp. "You are not a broken part, child. You are the whole machine. Make sure he remembers that." The words stuck with Alara. The whole machine. It was a powerful thought. She had spent so long as a cog in Julian's world that she had forgotten she was capable of running on her own. The turning point came on the 8th day. Alara was in the archive room, staring at the starlight gown. It hung there, pristine and perfect, a monument to her talent and her pain. She felt a wave of anger, so potent it made her dizzy. Not at Julian, at the dress. It was a beautiful cage, a symbol of everything she had poured herself into for a man who had used it to wound another woman. On impulse, she unzipped the bag. She pulled the gown from its hanger. The silk was cool and heavy in her hands. It whispered as it moved. She held it up against herself, looking at her reflection in the polished black floor. Dark skin against pure white. Dark girls don't belong in white gowns. Julian's ugly words echoed in the silent room. He was wrong. The voice came from the doorway. Dante. He was leaning against the frame, his suit jacket off. His tie loosened. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear and focused on her. She hadn't heard him approach. He moved through his own house like a phantom. Alara let the dress fall. "It's just fabric." "No," he said, walking into the room. "It's a statement." He tried to tell the world what it meant. He failed. He stopped a few feet from her. "What does it mean to you?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked for her interpretation. Her work was always filtered through Julian's narrative. "I don't know anymore," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "When I was making it, I thought it was about light, purity of form. Now it is about reclamation," he finished for her. He looked at the dress, then back at her. "It is waiting for its artist to give it a new story." He paused. "Oh, I have a proposition for you." This was it, the other shoe dropping, the price of her rescue. She braced herself. "I don't work for free, and I don't work for credit that belongs to someone else." The words came out sharper than she intended. A slow smile touched his lips, that rare transformative smile. "Good," he said. "That is the first rule of good business." He gestured for her to follow him. He led her not to an office, but to a part of the estate she hadn't seen before. It was a separate building, a former orangery, a vast structure of glass and iron that had been completely gutted. The inside was a cavernous, empty space, filled with dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. It smelled of old earth and new potential. "The Moretti Group has a philanthropic arm," he said. So the slight hesitation in his voice, suggesting the philanthropy might occasionally involve kneecaps. "We are launching a new initiative, an incubator for emerging designers, artists who have the talent but not the resources. We will provide funding, studio space, materials, legal support, and a platform to launch their own brands, under their own names." Ilara stared at the vast, empty space. Her mind, the architect's mind, was already filling it. Workstations here, cutting tables there, a wall of north-facing windows for the natural light. "You're starting a fashion brand?" she asked, confused. I'm starting a dozen, he replied. I am a collector, Miss Vance, of art, of companies, of talent. I have found it is more profitable to cultivate talent than to buy it secondhand. He walked to the center of the room, his footsteps echoing. So, this is your studio, and the incubator is yours to run. You will be the CEO and creative director. You will choose the designers. You will mentor them. You will build an empire, and it will have your name on the door. She was speechless. Her mind reeled. CEO, her own company, an empire. It was too much, too fast. It felt like a dream she was afraid to wake from. Why? She finally asked. Why me? Because you have already built one empire for a fool, he said simply. I am interested to see what you will build for yourself. He turned to face her, his expression serious. I am giving you the resources, the capital, the infrastructure. What you do with it is up to you. You will have complete autonomy. My only condition is that you succeed. Her fear of dependency, her anger at being handled, evaporated. This wasn't a gilded cage. It was an open field and a set of keys to the best equipment on the market. He wasn't offering her a job. He was offering her a world to build. I accept, she said, her voice firm. And in that moment, the exhaustion that had clung to her for years finally began to dissipate, burned away by the bright, hot flame of purpose. The next few months were a blur of focused, exhilarating work. Ilara threw herself into the project with a ferocity that surprised even herself. The orangery was transformed. Under her direction, it became a state-of-the-art atelier, a clean, bright, beautiful space designed for creation. Dante was true to his word. Every request she made was fulfilled, instantly and without question. She needed a specific type of Japanese loom. It was flown in. She wanted to hire a team of the best pattern makers in Paris, so most of whom were still technically under contract with other houses. They were suddenly, mysteriously, available. Dante's quiet actions were a constant humming presence in the background. She would mention a problem, and the next day it would be solved. A recalcitrant supplier would suddenly become remarkably cooperative. A zoning permit that should have taken months would be approved in days. He never explained how. He simply removed obstacles, clearing a path for her to run. Their relationship settled into a new rhythm. It was a partnership. They would have dinner together most nights, sometimes with Nonna, sometimes alone. They would talk for hours. She would show him sketches, explain her vision for the incubator. He would listen with that unnerving stillness of his questions sharp and insightful. He was not interested in the aesthetics. He was interested in the structure, the business model, the long-term strategy. He, in turn, would sometimes talk about his world. He spoke of supply chains, of market forces, of hostile takeovers, all in the same calm, detached voice. He described his business like a grand, complex chess game played on a global scale. He was not boastful. He was simply explaining the rules of his reality. One evening, he was on the phone in his study, the door slightly ajar. Ilara was passing by and heard his voice, low and cold. No, the offer is not negotiable. You will sell, because the alternative is that the safety board revokes your operating license, your shipping partner declares bankruptcy, and the photos of you with the senator's aide become the new wallpaper on every tabloid blog in the country. It is your choice, but you will sell. There was a pause. I thought you'd see it my way. He hung up. He looked up and saw her in the doorway. He did not look surprised or ashamed. Business, he said by way of explanation. You ruin people, she said, not as an accusation, but as an observation. I ruin obstacles, he corrected her. There is a difference. That man was an obstacle to 300 people keeping their jobs at a factory he wanted to strip for parts. He leaned back in his chair. The world is not a kind place, Ilara. It is a series of contests. You can either be a player or a piece. For a long time, you were a piece in someone else's game. I prefer you as a player. It was the slow burn of two galaxies colliding. He was cold, ruthless, and moved in a world of darkness and power. She was creative, empathetic, and building a world of light and beauty. Yet they found their center of gravity in each other. He provided the safety and structure for her to create, and she provided a window into a world of passion and artistry that his life of cold calculation lacked. She was not afraid of his darkness, and he, she was beginning to realize, was not threatened by her light. He seemed to crave it. Meanwhile, the world outside their quiet sanctuary had not forgotten Julian Croft. After his public implosion, he had vanished. Then, the stories started. At first, they were whispers in the fashion press, then louder articles. His company was in shambles. Key talent had defected. His fall collection was indefinitely postponed. Then came the lawsuits. Not from Dante, from other designers, former employees, all emboldened by his fall from grace, like all claiming he had stolen their work, their ideas. The empire he had built on her back was crumbling under the weight of its own fraudulent foundations. Ilara read the articles with a strange sense of detachment. She felt no pity, but she felt no joy either. He was simply irrelevant, a ghost from a former life. Julian, however, did not see it that way. In his mind, this was all a temporary setback. He was living in a small borrowed apartment, his assets frozen, his reputation in tatters, but his arrogance was remarkably resilient. He was convinced this was all Ilara's fault, that she had somehow conspired with this Moretti character to ruin him, but he also believed she was nothing without him. "Give her 3 days," he had drunkenly told one of the few friends who would still take his calls. "She'll get tired of playing with the mobster. She'll come crawling back. She needs me. She has no ideas of her own." He could not comprehend a world in which he was not the center. He decided to act. He saw a notice in the press about the upcoming Obsidian Gala, the most exclusive event in the European financial calendar, hosted by the Moretti Group. The announcement mentioned the launch of a new philanthropic venture. He knew it had to be her. He would go there. He would confront her. He would expose her, and Dante Moretti, for the frauds they were. He would remind her of her obligation to him. He would make her see that her place was by his side. He sold his last valuable possession, a vintage watch, to buy a forged ticket and rent a tuxedo. He saw it as a heroic last stand, a final, desperate move to reclaim his kingdom. So he did not realize he was not walking into a confrontation. He was walking into a carefully prepared, patiently waiting trap. The gala was not just a party. It was the final move in Dante's chess game. It was checkmate. The Obsidian Gala was held in a restored 19th century bank, a cathedral of commerce that the Moretti Group now owned. The main hall was a cavern of marble and gold leaf, filled with the most powerful people in Europe. Billionaires, politicians, and titans of industry moved through the space, their hushed conversations the engine hum of the continent. Ilara stood on a dais at the far end of the hall, next to Dante. She wore a gown of her own design. It was not white. It was the color of a midnight sky, a deep, liquid black silk that seemed to drink the light. It was cut with an architect's precision, stark and elegant. Around her neck, she wore a single breathtaking diamond on a platinum chain, a gift from Dante delivered to her room an hour before with a simple note. "Tonight, you are not the artist, you are the work." She felt a calm she had never known. Her fear was gone, replaced by a solid, centered strength. Her incubator, which she had named Atelier Nova, was ready to launch. 3 brilliant young designers she had personally selected were in the audience, their faces shining with hope. Tonight, Dante would officially announce the venture and introduce her as its CEO. Her vindication was at hand. She saw Julian before he saw her. He had managed to slip past the outer layers of security, but he stood out in this environment. His rented tuxedo was a size too big, his face was gaunt and slick with sweat, and his eyes had the wild, so hunted look of a cornered animal. He scanned the crowd, his gaze frantic. Then he saw her. A spasm of pure, undiluted hatred crossed his face. He started pushing his way through the crowd, his movements clumsy and aggressive. People turned, irritated, then shocked as they recognized the disgraced designer. Dante, standing beside Alara, did not even turn his head. He merely murmured, 5 seconds. Julian reached the dais, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He pointed a trembling finger at Alara. "You!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "You did this! You ruined me!" The hum of conversation in the great hall died instantly. Every eye turned to the drama unfolding on the stage. "You think you can just leave?" he continued, his voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "After everything I did for you, I made you. You have an obligation to me. That's my talent you're standing on, my ideas." He took a step closer, his hand reaching for her arm. "You are coming with me. We are going to fix this." Ilara did not flinch. She simply looked at his hand, then at his face. "Let go of my arm, Julian," she said, her voice low and cold. Before he could react, another hand closed around his wrist. Dante's hand. Dante had moved so quickly, so silently, he seemed to have materialized between them. He did not grip Julian's wrist tightly. He simply held it, but there was a power in his stillness that was more terrifying than any violence. "I believe," Dante said, his voice a quiet counterpoint to Julian's hysteria, "that you are mistaken." Julian tried to pull his arm away, but it was like trying to move a marble statue. Panic flared in his eyes. "You can't keep her!" he spat. "She's mine! Her contract!" "Ah, the contract," Dante said, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. He released Julian's wrist, and Julian stumbled back. Dante reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out not a weapon, but a slim, folded piece of paper. He flicked it open. "Your employment contract with Croft Couture. The one with the notoriously predatory intellectual property clause, claiming ownership of all employee creations in perpetuity throughout the universe." "Exactly," Julian said, a triumphant sneer on his face. "She signed it. Everything she makes is mine." "It is a truly villainous document," Dante agreed calmly, still looking at the paper. "Which is why I was so eager to acquire it." He looked up, his eyes locking with Julian's. "When I acquired the debt of your holding company, I also acquired all its assets. That includes furniture, fabric, trademarks, and of course, all employment contracts." He smiled, a cold, sharp predator's smile. "As the new owner of Croft Couture, or what's left of it, I am her employer, and you are a former employee I terminated for cause." Julian's face went slack. The logic was inescapable, brutal, and complete. "But," Dante continued, his voice dropping, drawing the silent, rapt audience even closer, "I found I had no interest in owning Miss Vance's genius. It's inefficient. So, this afternoon, I signed this." He pulled another document from his pocket. "A full and unconditional release from that contract. All intellectual property, past, present, and future, has been returned to its rightful creator. It is signed by me, as the CEO of her former employer." He didn't stop there. He held up his phone, the screen glowing. "This is a confirmation of a wire transfer, liquidating all remaining assets of Croft Couture. The proceeds, after settling your considerable debts, came to a grand total of €12.47. It has been deposited into your account." He paused, letting the humiliation land. "And finally, the brand name Julian Croft. I own that now too. I had my legal team file for the trademark this morning. You no longer have the right to use your own name for commercial purposes." It was a public execution, carried out with the calm precision of a surgeon. Dante had not just ruined him, he had erased him. He had stripped him of his company, his money, his past work, and even his own name. Julian stared, his mind finally, completely shattering. The arrogance that had been his armor for so long cracked and fell away, revealing the terrified, hollow man beneath. A low, guttural sob escaped his lips. He dropped to his knees. "Please," he begged, the word a pathetic, strangled gasp. He was no longer looking at Dante or Alara. He was looking at the crowd, at the sea of powerful faces watching his utter annihilation. "Please, don't!" Two of Dante's security men, who had been moving silently through the crowd, appeared at his side. They did not touch him roughly, they simply lifted him to his feet as one might lift a child. He was sobbing uncontrollably now, his body shaking, his face a grotesque mask of tears and despair. They began to lead him away, his cries echoing in the vast, silent hall. Dante watched him go, his expression unreadable. Then he turned, not to the audience, but to Alara. He took her hand, his grip warm and steady. He faced the crowd, which was still processing the brutal spectacle they had just witnessed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dante's voice rang out, clear and strong, cutting through the silence. "Forgive the interruption. As I was saying, the Moretti Group is proud to launch a new venture tonight." He raised their joined hands slightly. "Some of you may have known Julian Croft's work. You may have admired his designs, his boutiques, his brand. I am here tonight to tell you that you were admiring the wrong person." His gaze swept the room, commanding their absolute attention. For the last 7 years, the true architect of that empire has worked in silence, her name erased, her brilliance stolen. She has been the most capable person in every room she has ever entered, and she has been systematically overlooked. That ends tonight. He turned his body slightly, presenting her to the world. His voice was filled with a quiet, profound pride. "I would like to introduce you to the founder, CEO, and creative force behind Atelier Nova. The woman who designed every piece you ever admired, the true artist, Miss Alara Vance." A wave of sound washed over her. It was not polite applause. It was a roar. It was the sound of 1,000 powerful people understanding, in an instant, that they were witnessing the birth of a new star. They were applauding her story, her resilience, her triumph. They were applauding her. Alara looked out at the sea of faces, and for the first time she did not feel like an imposter. She felt the weight of the last 7 years, the quiet exhaustion, the managed depletion, lift from her shoulders like a physical burden. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face, reaching her eyes, which were suddenly bright with unshed tears, not of sorrow, but of profound, cathartic relief. She felt Dante squeeze her hand. She turned to him, and in his dark eyes she saw not just pride, but a deep, steady affection. It was not the fiery passion of a whirlwind romance. It was something quieter, stronger, and more real. It was the recognition of an equal. It was the promise of a partnership. Later, after the speeches, after the handshakes, after the endless stream of people who now wanted to know her, they stood on a private balcony overlooking the Seine. The city lights glittered below, a diamond net cast upon the darkness. The noise of the gala was a distant hum. "He seems warm," she said, her voice laced with dry wit, remembering Nona's words. Dante let out a low chuckle. "She's already annoyed with you. Says you're a bad influence. You're making me smile too much in public." They stood in comfortable silence for a long moment, watching the boats glide by on the black water. "Thank you," she said softly. It felt inadequate for what he had done, but it was all she had. "I did nothing," he replied, turning to face her. "I simply corrected a market inefficiency. I moved an asset from a place where it was being wasted to a place where it can flourish." He reached out and gently brushed a stray curl from her face. His touch was light, respectful. "The rest was all you." She looked up at him, at this complicated, dangerous, and unexpectedly decent man. Ah, the man who saw the world in lines and numbers but had made room in his calculations for justice. The man who had bought a collection of dresses not to possess them, but to liberate their creator. "I don't leave because things become complicated," she said, echoing Nona's warning. "Good," he said, his voice soft. "My life is rarely simple." He held her gaze. "But with you, it is better." It was not a declaration of undying love. It was a statement of fact, a quiet, honest truth. And for Alara, it was more than enough. It was everything. She leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust she hadn't known she was capable of. He wrapped an arm around her and they stood together, two complicated people who had found their equilibrium. This was not a fairy tale ending. It was not happily ever after. It was something far more precious. It was the quiet, steady peace of finding your rightful place in the world. It was the solid ground of a new beginning, earned through fire and forged in silence. It was the promise of what comes next. And for the first time in a long time, Alara Vance was not afraid of the future. She was ready to build it.